We're in the middle of Sviras HaOmer, as those who like to say that Sviras HaOmer is one of the easiest mitzvahs and it's one of the most difficult mitzvahs. It's one of the easiest mitzvahs that it takes a couple of seconds to do, but you have to do it for 7 weeks. You got to do it for 49 days. So, as always, before we do a mitzvah, we make a bracha. As the Gemara tells us in Psach, we make a bracha over l'asiyasam. First we make the bracha, and then we do the mitzvah. Except for some exceptions to the rule, like tefillas ger. When a non-Jew, when a Gentile converts to Judaism, they have to make the blessing after the mikvah for obvious reasons, because they're not Jewish before. But the general call is we make brachas and we make them over l'asiyasam. There's another bracha we make, usually associated with a mitzvah that happens once in a while throughout the year. On Pesach we make a shechiyanu, on Shavuos we make a shechiyanu, on Sukkot. So we make a bracha on shofar, we make a shechiyanu on lulav. So the Mefarshim asks, why no shechiyanu on Sviras HaOmer? There's a famous answer of the Baal Hamor. The Baal Hamor answers that since today we count Sviras HaOmer, it's only a Zecher LaMikdash. It's only a mitzvah midrabanan today. It's not a biblical mitzvah anymore. We don't have the temple, we don't have the Karban Omer, and therefore it causes us agmas nefesh. So another, besides a mitzvah coming once in a while, in order to make a shechiyanu, it has to be something associated with simcha. And Sviras HaOmer, Bizman Hazeh, is not associated with Simcha because reminds us of the Agmas Nefesh, of the destruction, reminds us of the destruction of the temple. Therefore, no Shechiyanu. You can't make a Shechiyanu with Svira. That's why we say, Arachamanu Yaksulanu Avodas Beis HaMikdash Kor Amin Tzela, because we want to speedily bring the day where we could have the temple back and fulfill the mitzvah of Svira Min HaTorah again today. Just like we have a concept of Avelis, but we know Avelis no public Avelis could coincide with Yontif. They're just not compatible. So too the Baal Hamor saying Shechiyanu isn't compatible, even though a mitzvah that comes once in a while. But if it's not a mitzvah sheyesh bo simcha, rather, it reminds us of the Agmas Nefesh of the Korban Abayir, so then no Shechiyanu. That's the answer of the Baal Hamor. Others, Achronim and Rav Soloveitchik among them, wants to say another reason why there's no Shechiyanu. So this answer to the Baal Hamor helps if you hold it's D'Rabbanan. Why not if you hold it's D'Oraisa according to the Rambam? So one answer you could say is, even though the Rambam might hold, even though the Rambam holds Sviras HaOmer Bizman Hazeh as D'Oraisa, since you could potentially bring karbanos, but that's the pshat in the Rambam. The Rambam puts Sviras HaOmer in Hilchas Tamidin Umusafim, so we see it related to the karban. But this, like in the Bizman Beis HaMikdash, you counted Sfira at night with the potential of bringing the karban the next day. So to Bizman Hazeh, we can't bring karbanos in theory according to the Rambam, because Kedusha HaMikdash is Le'asir Lavo, is a Shechina Eina B'Teila, and therefore one is permitted to. One, in theory. So therefore you could still see, even though according to the Rambam it's D'Oraisa, you could still say this doesn't warrant a Shechiyanu, since we're not doing the mitzvah B'Shrei Musa. However, according to Rav Soloveitchik, you could certainly explain according to the Rambam or anyone else. We say the pasuk Shechiyanu V'Giyanu Lazman Hazeh. That when you make a Shechiyanu, it usually relates to a milestone, some type of specific event. Yetzias Mitzrayim, Kabbalah HaTorah, etc. You have special events that we make Shechiyanu over. Sviras HaOmer is an anticipation of the next day, and the day after, and the day after. We're looking ahead, the anticipation of Matan Torah. The whole purpose of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the exodus from Egypt, was to receive the Torah at Har Sinai. And therefore it's the anticipation from one day to the next. So we're not making a bracha, there's no milestone we hit today, we're in the middle. And therefore, no Shechiyanu was designated by Chazal. So we see the Baal HaMor and the other Achronim of Soloveitchik and others have two opposite views on why Shechiyanu, why no Shechiyanu. According to the Baal HaMor, because we remind us of the destruction of the temple, it reminds us of the past. And according to Rav Soloveitchik, because we're looking to the future. Perhaps according to the Rav Soloveitchik's Malka, we can explain how come we know there's a mitzvah of Mitzameach Chasam Akala, the wedding, it's a time of Simcha, and hopefully you're not getting married too many times either. So why not Shechiyanu at a wedding? So there are many reasons, perhaps, but since you could say it's not the act itself of getting married, it's the anticipation of the next day, every day, every week gets better. So therefore no Shechiyanu either. So either way, there's two schools of thought. So really, they're both true. And this is the yesod for not only regarding the mitzvah of Shechiyanu, the mitzvah of Sfiras OMER, but it is true in Judaism in general, that we always have to have a dual awareness. We have to, on one hand, we can never forget about the past, and also we can never forget about where we're going. We can never forget about our past, that we have to realize that we came from Yetzias Mitzrayim, and we were slaves in Egypt. And if not, on the other hand, just going free from Egypt, it's true, Dayenu, but it wouldn't have had that spiritual renaissance. Without Kabbalah Torah, it wouldn't have been all that worthwhile. So therefore, you have to remember we're both sides, and we're always into the power of contrast. That's why even on the night of Pesach, Matchel beganus v'siyam b'shvach, you begin with the shame and you end with the praise, because you always have to realize where you're coming from. You were once slave and you're going free. And that's the ultimate. On one hand, like the Baal HaMor is right, you can never forget your past. On the other hand, Rav Soloveitchik is right, we always have to have a look into the future. And that's how we just, many celebrated this past week Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel Independence Day. But the night before, especially in Eretz Yisrael, they have a big ceremony, Yom HaZikaron, a day of remembrance of the fallen soldiers and all the men, women, and children who have given up their lives and continue to give up their lives daily for Eretz Yisrael. So, why did the chief rabbinate institute Yom HaZikaron the night before Yom HaAtzmaut? Because to fully appreciate what we have in Eretz Yisrael, you have to realize what you gave up for it. And that's the yesod throughout. So as we count the days of Sfira, it's basically bridging the gap between, on one hand, Yetzias Mitzrayim, when we were Avdus, from Avdus to Chayros, we went from slaves in Mitzrayim, and we're counting up to the days of Matan Torah, which is the general question of Sfira, could tie into Ba'omer, Lo'omer. Are we counting the days from Yetzias Mitzrayim, or are we counting the days to Shavuos? And the answer is both. In order for the Jew to be Matzliach and have a full perspective, you always have to realize you can never forget your past. At the same time, one has to be focused on the future as well. There's a famous Shaila, the Achrona Mass. I think the Minchas Chinuch was one of the first ones to discuss it. A katan shehigdio b'sfira. Someone has a birthday in the middle of Sfiras OMER. Is anyone born between Pesach and Shavuos? So not every year, but the year they become bar mitzvah, or perhaps bas mitzvah as well, is whether one is permitted to count afterwards with a bracha. So the Minchas Chinuch writes, Shem nistapek l'shitas habahag. According to the shitas habahag, hech hadin. Again, if you hold it's 49 separate mitzvahs like Rov Rishonim, So there's nothing to talk about. Of course you could count. If I missed the first 48 days, I could count. But according to the Bahag, at least the simple understanding of the Bahag, that it's one big mitzvah. How could a katan be chayev? How can a katan continue counting? Ha'im yochel lahamshich lispor im habracha. Darei ad hashta when he was a ktana, hayu pater mi mitzvahs sviras ha'omer below mana elo mishum mitzvahs chinach. Up until now, he's been counting mitam chinach, and not midin daraisa. V'ata shehigdel mishum chinach leka. Now that he turns 13, it's not a din chinach. It's out the mitzvah svira. So the question is, how do we view it? Did Kaven that hashta sfiras or haisab b'tur imkain einam? Do I assume all the days he was counting as a katan doesn't count? And it's like someone who forgot and didn't count. So do I view those? How do I view those days that he counted as a katan? Do I view them that they're mitzaref or not? So based on the yesod of the Rav Soloveitchik, he learns the Bahag differently. That the Bahag shita is the reason why if you miss a complete day you can't count, not because it's one big mitzvah. It's 49 separate mitzvahs even according to the Bahag. But what's different is the definition of a sphere is you need consecutive, you need continuity. It needs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can't count 1, 3, 6, 9, 12. So therefore, the reason why if you miss a complete day, it's over if you don't longer have continuity. But so therefore, he points out, so a katan, when he counts, so even though he's not getting even though he's not getting the kiyam mitzvah, what he's gaining is by counting during those days, he's enabling himself to be able to count. But even a sphere, when you're a katan, counts as a sphere. Umana b'yom below bracha. Yachol hamshich onas bracha b'yom habam. Ki keven da kolpana ma'isa svir yeshol gam b'yom. V'imkein hayak b'katan shehigdel hacheshban kiyam v'krivim v'karinam be'tamimis. U'amar nira dechayev ham. And therefore, based on Rav Soloveitchik, he says no, every day is a separate mitzvah anyway. But the reason why is you need consecutive. So he has been counting every day. So therefore, the mice of a katan counts, and therefore you can continue counting with the bracha. So my nafkamina in this understanding of the Bahag, the nafkamina, if you hold it's one big mitzvah, so then a katan perhaps can't continue counting, because he was a tana. But if you hold that it's 49 separate mitzvahs. If it's 49 separate mitzvahs, there's nothing to talk about. If it's one big mitzvah, there's what to discuss. So the major nafkamina is, what happens if someone knows they're going to have a surgery in the middle of Svira, and they know they're going to miss a 24-hour period? Should they bother counting, knowing now that in advance they're going to miss a day later on? So, according to the Bahag, if I know in advance I'm going to miss day 49, I shouldn't bother counting at all. The simple understanding of the Bahag. According to Rav Soloveitchik's understanding of the Bahag, I should be able to count up until the time because I still have my Maisa Sphira. And that's how Rav Soloveitchik also understands the din. In fact, they in the Hari Kedem they quote a Uvda where a Rav Echad felt that he realized his time was coming, and he realized, however, he knew that he wasn't going to live through Svira, so he wanted to know, he's not going to have a Kiyam HaMitzvah, he's not going to finish, what should he do? So they have a base on the Rav Yisod, Chayiv Lispor Im Bracha. The Chozman Shehu Chai, HaCheshbon Chai, and that's how it should be. So similarly, they have a question by an Onain. An Onain is from the in between the death and the burial. So in between the death and the burial, so someone dies. So before the kfura, the one who's dead, meisim chavshi min mitzvahs, is not an issue. But the one who are alive, so the pata min mitzvahs, misha meisim mutu lefanav. So Machokas Rashi and Tosfos on what's the situation there, on what is it if why is he pater? So Rashi writes pater because pater of a mutter. It's you're doeg. You're worried about the other things, so you can't do the mitzvah properly. And Tosas Kos Yishami, no, it's Kabbalah Mace, it's Rola Garush, it's usher to do it. So it's Machokas Rashi and Tosas, when an onin is pater, does it mean pater of a mutter, or it's usher? So we passing like Tosas that it's usher for an onin to do mitzvahs. So the shayla is, let's say you're an onin for 25 hours. You're going to go 25 hours without counting svira. So then we passing, you miss a complete day, it's over. So there's a whole discussion for an onain regarding what does he do for the Tilo Shadayim if he wants to eat bread. Why isn't it Tilo Shadayim? It's because the Tilo Shadayim is a mitzvah midrabanan there's a mitzvah midrabanan to wash your hands before eating bread, and there's issa drabanan to eat bread without washing your hands. So they point out that Alts the mitzvah d'Rabbanan he's pater from, but based on the Isser, he's not allowed to violate Isurim, so he'd have to wash his. So that's why he has to wash his hand without a bracha. Because why? Because Alts the mitzvah he's pater. The only reason he's washing his hands is to avoid the Aveira. The only time you make a bracha if you're doing it for a mitzvah, not to avoid an aveira. So therefore, over here also they want to say a bigger chiddush, even if there's no aveira, but the fact that if I don't count now, I'm going to lose the cheshbon. So based on Rav Selevan, it's not a kasha. You count the day. You're not getting the mitzvah. There's no mitzvah when you count because you're pater and it's usher. I'm only doing it out that I can continue, that I keep the Maisa Sphira going, kind of like a katan. And therefore that's the pshat. And therefore those are some nafkaminas you have in terms of whether a person's going to miss a complete day later on in Sphira, can he continue counting with the bracha? The simple pshat in the Bahag is no, but the Rav Selevan you can, and that's all those cases. Someone who thinks they're going to die in between, or surgery, or an onain, all these touch on that. That's the Yisod of Rav Selevan, that the pshat in the Bahag isn't that. Pshat in the Bahag is the pshat in the Bahag is that it's not one big mitzvah, but the reason why you can't go back is because you're lacking the continuity. It's not considered svira unless you count consecutive. The Rambam writes that a katan shehigdio, a minor who becomes a bar mitzvah boy, someone turns 13 in the middle of between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni. So the halacha is in general regarding Pesach Sheni, there's a machlokes Rabbi and Rav Nassan whether Pesach Sheni is a regel b'fnei atzmo or is it a tashlum and Rishon. So that's a discussion in the Gemara. A nafka mina gershen is gayer or a katan shehigdia. if a katan becomes bar mitzvah being Pesach Rishon, Pesach Sheni, so if you assume it's Tashlum El Rishon, so he's patur, but he was never chayav. If it was Regel B'fnei Atzmo, he'd be chayav. So the Rambam has a chiddush. The Rambam writes that the Gemara tells us the katan shehigdil is chayav on Pesach Sheni because we paskin Regel B'fnei Atzmo. However, the Rambam has a chiddush. Let's say the katan was mishtatef to the Karban Pesach Rishon while he was a katan. So the Rambam writes, if he was involved in the Chabura in Pesach Rishon, he is exempt from Pesach Sheni. Even though at the time when Pesach Rishon he was a katan, and he hasn't become a gadol until later, the Rambam writes, he could be mitzaref. So the question is, the Minchas Chinuch, the Kesav Mishnah, they all ask, how can the mice of a katan help later on when he becomes chayav if he's partur now? So there's a famous answer of the Nitziv in the Meishiv Davar that it's true a katan is only chayav out chinuch before he becomes bar mitzvah. Nevertheless, we got him to be mitzdaref because we see he is mechayev. He's this chayav as a katan, opposed to a ger who's not chayav at all. A katan is chayav, and therefore he writes that we see a mice of a katan does help for when he becomes a gadol later. So we see even though he does something as a katan, nevertheless it can be mitzdaref later on. In fact, that's what there's a famous Rabbi Kiva Eger who raises the following question regarding Birkas Hamazon. We know the Chiyuv Birkas Hamazon is Vechalta V'Sabato V'Rachta. You only chayav in benching min Torah if you eat Kidei Sevilla. So what happened to the katan? A 12-year-old eats a full meal. Let's assume he benches even, or let's assume he doesn't bench. It could be, maybe it's bench. The question is, let's say he benched while he was a katan, but now he's chayev min Torah because now he's 13, and he's a Kedei Sevilla. So the Rabbi Kiva Eger leaves it Sarach Ian, does the katan have to bench over? Do I say the mice of a katan counts like the Nitziv writes by Karban Pesach, or does I know that since he was exempt at the time, he has to bench over? Or a similar halacha is the halacha of an onain. An onain is pata min ha-mitzvahs. It's from the time of the death to the burial. So the machlokas Rashi and Tosfos. An onain is pater because it's mangrama. No, he's pater because according to Rashi that he's busy being focused on the mace. Or according to Tosfos, it's not covered on mace or garash. Now, according to Rashi, if you're up to volunteering, you can. According to Tosfos, it's also. We pass them like Tosfos. It's not. It's all garash. It's not covered on mace. So the only is usher to do mitzvahs. So the question is, let's say the onin has a full meal and he's exempt. Everyone agrees. But let's say after the burial he's still full from the meal. Would he be chayev in benching? That's what the Chachmas Adam discusses. Whether I say now, it has to Chaz. And it's discuss it. It gets into what is the ikr. Is the ikr? There's the achalta b'sabata. Is the ikr the achila, the svia? Obviously, you need both. So that's a discussion as well. Does a mice of a katan count? Does a mice of an onain count? So that's what the Nitziv has a big chiddush regarding the mitzvah of tzitzis. That what happens if a katan makes his own tzitzis and then becomes a gadol? Well, he's a katan, of course it's good. Does he need to get a new pair of tzitzis? Does he have to redo the tzitzis? Why? Because Rabbi Tam writes in Gin, there must be a mechuyev b'davar in order to do the mitzvah. So the Nitziv has a big chiddush. A katan is, since the katan is chayav out tzchinach, so that will even count later when he becomes a gadol. So he says this is the pshat in the Rambam. The Rambam writes that the mice of a katan can be mitzdaref later, even though during the time of Pesach Rishon he's patur, but if he does it, he could be yotze, and this could be relevant to the famous question as well, of a katan shehigdil b'mei svira, a katan who's counting during svira, and he counts as a katan. Does the act he does as a katan count for later on to enable him to continue counting with a bracha? Because since you need tamimas, if you assume it's one big mitzvah like the simple understanding of the Bahag, so that would be the Shaila, and that's so many Rav Shlomo Zalman, Rav C. Pesach Frank, and so many Achronim write that a katan should continue counting with the bracha. It's like it works by Pesach Rishon to exempt him from Pesach Sheni. So too, it helps by Sviras Omer, all the counting he did while he was a child can be mitzvah later when he becomes chayav. So to continue our discussion on Sviras Omer, we'll discuss the famous question of the Minchas Chinuch. The Minchas Chinuch was one of the first ones to discuss it, but many have discussed it since. The question of a katan shehigdil b'mei svira. Someone becomes bar mitzvah in the middle of Sviras Omer, which means anyone who has the birthday basically between Pesach and Shavuos. So it shouldn't be an uncommon question. And let me just explain some assumptions we have to make in the question. So if you assume Sviras Omer is 49 independent mitzvahs, it's not much of a question. Then there's no, of course you continue counting. It's no different than someone who missed the first 48 days. If we assume it's an independent mitzvah, so you count. So the assumption is we're assuming it's one big mitzvah, like the assumption of how some explain the Bahag. And another assumption is that the katan has been counting as a katan. In other words, it can't be any better than a gadol. If a gadol hasn't been counting for 20 days, in fact, he wouldn't make a bracha either. So the assumption is a katan has been counting as a katan, presumably with the bracha, but the bracha is not really relevant, but he's been counting every day, let's assume with the bracha, out chinuch, and now he becomes bar mitzvah. So if you assume it's one big mitzvah, so the question is, can a katan continue counting with the bracha? He's been counting every day, can he continue counting? The issue seems to be, if someone does an action in a state of exemption, a state of patur, can it be mitzvah later on when he becomes chayav? Because a katan, when he's counting, he's patur. Min HaTorah, he's 100% patur. The mitzvah chinuch is only d'Rabbanan. It's a question whether the mitzvah chinuch is on him or on daddy. But certainly he's not chayav midrabbanan, min HaTorah. So now he's chayav min HaTorah. So out the Torah's tamimis, he hasn't done anything yet. So the question is, does an action done as a katan, can it be or when he's in this case a katan, but an action done during a state of exemption, can it count later on when a person becomes obligated in that same mitzvah? So we have to see if there's any precedence in Shas for this question and work ourselves back. So there's a famous Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. Hey, Rosh Hashanah, you're not there yet, hang in there. It's at the end of Rosh Hashanah, I think Chavches, Chavtes. So the Gemara talks about someone who is temporarily insane. You know, a show to someone who's insane is, legally speaking, is not obligated to mitzvahs. So obviously he doesn't know what's going on. So you're exempt from mitzvahs. So the question is, in our purposes, I'll keep it simple. The case is, it's not simple in real life, but in our case it'll be simple. The person, if he's temporarily insane, so let's say during the hours of 8 and 9 p.m. he's insane. During the hours of 9 and 10 he's sane. So let's assume for our purposes the mitzvah of eating matzah leil Pesach, let's say nightfall is 8 o'clock. So he eats his kazayas matzah during the time of insanity when he's exempt from the mitzvah. And then he wakes up from his insanity and it's 9 o'clock. Is he obligated to eat another kazayas matzah? What do I say? The matzah he ate during the time of 8 to 9, it works. So the Gemara concludes, and the Rambam paskins this way, it's a no-go. He is obligated to eat another kazayas matzah. The matzah he ate during the time of insanity does not count for anything. Maybe he'll mess up his stomach, it might count for that, but it won't count for, in terms of the mitzvah, it won't matter much. And therefore...
Because of kavanah?
Yeah, well, right, so we'll see. So, it will be more than kavanah, but we'll see. It has to do with kavanah, right? Because so we see from here, anyway, simple pshat is that since he was exempt when he ate the matzah, so even though he becomes chayav later on, we see from this Gemara it seems to be a mitzvah done during the state of exemption does not count later on when a person becomes chayav. That's the simple understanding of the Gemara. If we go with this Gemara, this is the only Gemara we know, it would come out that a katan cannot count with the bracha, because his first 25 days he was counting as a katan, does not mitzdaref later on. On the other hand, however, there's another Gemara which seems to say the other direction. There's an apparent contradiction. There's a Gemara in Yevamos. The Gemara Yevamos is talking about a convert, Geirus. The Yontif Shavuos is coming up, we're all Geirim. So the Gemara talks about the mitzvah of Pru Ravu regarding a ger. The mitzvah of, there's a machlokas in the Mishnah between Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai. What's the technical fulfillment of Pru Ravu? We pass it like Beis Hillel, a boy and a girl. So the case is, a ger converts to Judaism. He already has a boy and a girl. Let's say he has a boy, and then he has a girl when he's Jewish. Whatever the case is, let's assume he has a boy and a girl, and now he converts to Judaism. Is he chayav to have more kids? Or do I say the boy and girl he had when he was a Gentile counts for his mitzvah of Pru Ravu? So let me just point out, there's a machlokas in the Gemara between Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish. And we pass things like Rav Yochanan that he is Yotze, he doesn't have to have more kids. Reish Lakish says because katan, he's a katan shenola dami, it's a whole sugya in its own right. But the bottom line is we pass like Rav Yochanan that it's a go. He doesn't have to have more kids. Within Rav Yochanan there's a separate machlokas achronim, rishonim. Do the kids have to convert also? Do I say when the Gemara says that he's Yotze the mitzvah of Pru Ravu, is that assuming that the kids also converted, or the kids don't have to? That's a separate machlokas. We'll just go simply. Rav Yochanan says it's a go. So what do we see? A guy is pater for the mitzvah of Pru Ravu. At one point the Gemara in Sanhedrin tells us, before Matan Torah, a guy was chayiv in Pru Ravu. Once we got the Torah in Har Sinai, he's no longer chayiv in Pru Ravu. It's a special mitzvah bringing up Jewish children, etc. We'll see what it is, the mitzvah. But he's pater. So therefore we see, even though a guy is pater from the mitzvah of Pru Ravu, yet when he becomes a yid, he fulfills his mitzvah. So we see a mitzvah done in the state of exemption does count. So we're left with an appearance of, based on this Gemara, a cutting can continue counting with the bracha. So there's an apparent contradiction between the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah and the Gemara Yevamos in terms of ma'isa done during the state of exemption, does it count or not? So how we reconcile will have a lot to do with our shaila. There are two ways to attack this shaila. Either we could attack the difference between a shota, someone temporarily insane, and a Gentile, or we could attack the mitzvah of matzah versus the mitzvah of Pru Ravu. Those are the two ways we could try to find a distinction to come up saying there is no contradiction. So we'll start with the Minchas Chinuch.
So I've got a suggestion for the difference between the two mitzvahs, but
we'll see if you mechav into the Minchas Chinuch. So the Minchas Chinuch points out, in fact, it's his first mitzvah in Mitzvah Aleph. He discusses the mitzvah of Pru Ravu. So he discusses as follows. The Gemara talks about, well, the Ramah even quotes the halacha. What about, as we said, you have to have a boy and a girl. What about, could you yotze a mitzvah of Pru Ravu with a mamzer? And I mean a mamzer be'isser. I don't mean a ger with a mamzer. I don't mean with two people who are allowed to live together. Let's say a person has a boy with his wife and he has a girl through adultery. So does he fulfill it? Okay, I'm not recommending it. We're talking about post facto. Legally speaking, does he get the mitzvah of Pru Ravu? So the Ramah quotes that yes. It's a discussion with the Yerushalmi, but the Ramah paskins yes. One can fulfill the mitzvah of Pru Ravu even with the mamzer. The kashi is, what about a mitzvah ba'avera? What do you mean? We know we have a principle, the Gemara tells us many places, but in Sukkah, by Lulav HaGazol,
that a mitzvah done through the means of Aveira, at best it's nothing. You're still involved in Gezela or in Aveira as well. So what do you mean? How can you fulfill your mitzvah pruver with a mamzer? Isn't a mitzvah above Aveira? So Minchas Chinuch has a very big chiddush l'halacha and non-halacha as well. He wants to know what is the nature of the mitzvah of pruver. So Tosfos and Baba Basra seems to say differently, and Rav Moshe says differently. But Tosfos Baba Basra writes, the mitzvah is the ma'aseh bia. It's when you have the relations with your wife, and the mitzvah is living with your wife with the potential of the wife becoming pregnant, having children. But it's the ma'aseh bia. It's the act of living with your wife, which is the mitzvah. And obviously, a tanai in the mitzvah is you have to have kids. In other words, she has to become pregnant and have a child. But the mitzvah is the ma'aseh bia. And the Minchas Chinuch has nothing doing. That's not the mitzvah. The mitzvah is result-oriented. The mitzvah is having children. We'll see how you have the kids might not be relevant. Let's say, for instance, maybe artificial insemination. Other ways, if your wife becomes pregnant, it seems according to the Minchas Chinuch, that's the bottom line here, that it's result-oriented. And he has some rayas. The Gemara in Yevamos talks about to fulfill the mitzvah of Pru-Ravu, you have to outlive your kids. That Tzabur Rahman al has kids, and the kids have to outlive you. Yeah, I hope you don't have to outlive your kids. Right, so...
Just making sure we were awake.
Exactly, don't get caught up on technicalities here. Don't confuse me with the facts. So they point out that as long as your kids outlive you, but if your kid dies, then you don't fulfill your mitzvah pruvu, you have to have more kids. So the Minchas Chinuch says we see it's result-oriented. You have to have kids in order that you can bring in the next generation that could have more kids. So the Minchas Chinuch writes, and therefore this he explains the Yisod. He says, when it comes to, let's say, there's a famous Yerushalmi that makes a distinction between, let's say someone steals matzah gezula. Let's say you steal matzah and use it for Leil Pesach. You use it for your mitzvah the night of Seder. So the Gemara says it's a no-go. It's a mitzvah haba ba'aveira. You do not fulfill your mitzvah of matzah that night. However, let's say there's no eruv in your community. It's a rishus harabim daraisa. And you take the matzah from shul, you carry it over, you violated this is daraisa on Shabbos of carrying, and you go home and eat the matzah. You might need tshuva on Chilul Shabbos, but the matzah is fine. You fulfill your mitzvah. What's the difference? How come? Why don't we say mitzvah ba'aveira in the case of the Chilul Shabbos? So the Yerushalmi and the Minchas Chinuch, right? Because the only time we say mitzvah ba'aveira is at the time I'm doing the mitzvah, I'm also involved in the aveira. So when it comes to, let's say, matzah gezula. So matzah gezula, while there's a mitzvah of a heshev es agzela, there's a continuous mitzvah of returning the stolen object. So every second I have the stolen matzah in my possession, the matzah is screaming, don't eat me, I'm stolen, you return me to my owner as you're eating the matzah. So b'shas mitzvah, you're involved in the aveira. But the Minchas Chinuch says, the aveira of adultery you did 9 months ago. But the kid is now, so therefore there is no issue of mitzvah baba. It's a technical issue when you apply mitzvah baba avera. So yeah.
But what about mamzeres though? Because if there's a mamzer that only takes place once the child is born though.
No, right. So therefore, no, but
so the bia happened 9 months ago, but the ma'isa now.
That's just the result. I mean, the fact the kid's a mamzer didn't do anything wrong, and what you did wrong was 9 months ago when you committed adultery. The fact the mamzer was created, that by itself, a mamzer is allowed to be living, and there's the people, and there are other ways of becoming a mamzer also. So that it's true you don't get to shame mamzer, but that's not the aveira. The aveira is creating the state where a mamzer will be created b'isser. The aveira you did, you could be sitting there being at a shiur or reading the newspaper when it happens. You could be involved in a mitzvah at the time the child's born. There's nothing. So therefore, the Minchas Chinuch says the issue depends on the nature of the ma'aseh mitzvah. So he says when it comes to now he wants to reconcile the two Gemaras. When it comes to the Gemara in Yevamos that says a Gentile had a boy and a girl while a Gentile then converted, it's a go because what's the mitzvah? The mitzvah of Pruvu is result oriented. It's true you had the boy and girl while you were a Gentile, but who cares? Right now I'm Jewish, I have a boy and a girl, they're my biological children, and therefore I fulfill my mitzvah apruavu. Masha'enke, when it comes to matzah, it's the Maisa mitzvah of matzah. What's the mitzvah of matzah? Kol zman I'm chewing on it, biting on the matzah and swallowing, I'm involved in the mitzvah. Once I finish that, my mitzvah is over. I might be sick for a while after, but that doesn't affect the mitzvah. The mitzvah is while I'm doing the Maisa mitzvah. So once the Maisa mitzvah is over, I have nothing left to show for it. So therefore, when I eat the matzah between 8 and 9 o'clock I wake up, I'm chayiv, I have nothing to show for my mitzvah, so I'm chayiv in my mitzvah. So therefore, the question is, where did Sfiras HaOmer fit in? A katan counting during Sfiras HaOmer. So the Minchas Chinuch says that the mitzvah of Sfira is the Maisa mitzvah of counting, and therefore katan was exempt, so he compares it to the case of the Rosh Hashanah, and therefore he says a katan can no longer continue count with the bracha because the counting's a Maisa mitzvah of Sfira, and therefore you have nothing to show for it the past 23 days, and therefore one can no longer count with the bracha. That's the conclusion of the Minchas Chinuch. The Turi Even, on the other hand, goes more with Avi's approach in terms of reconciling the difference between the Gemara. So he focused on more the mitzvah of matzah versus pru'ravu, the Maisa mitzvah versus the result-oriented mitzvah. The Turi Even goes with the approach comparing the Shota to the Gentile. That is, the Turi Even says, we know we have a principle, mitzvah strichas kavana, mitzvah ain't strichas kavana. It's a whole discussion in the Gemara, in the Rambam, etc. So he points out that so it's true a guy is putter from pru'ravu, but the assumption is he knows what he's doing when he's living with his wife, planning to have kids. He knows what he's doing. He knows he's living with his wife. He hopes the wife becomes pregnant and he has a son and a daughter. He knows what he's doing. B'She'ein Kain, when it comes to a shota, there's something even less than mitzvahs. There's mitzvahs strichas, there's mitzvahs ain't strichas kavana, but then there's another level of someone who is totally like nenas. He's totally misasek, as the Gemara says. So the person's misasek means he has no idea what's going on now. In other words, he thinks he's doing one thing and he's doing totally different. When it comes to someone who's a shota, he doesn't even know what he's doing. He doesn't know what's going on with the matzah. So the Turi Even wants to say when it comes to the case of the Gentile, that's different because since the guy can have kavanah, or he knows what he's, he usually has the idea to know what's going on, so he says that's enough of a difference. He has the idea that he's having children, even though he's not chayiv in the mitzvah, but if he knows what he's doing, so that could be mitzvah later on. Masha'inke, when it comes to the shota, he has no clue what's going on, so therefore the Maisa can't be. So if the difference is shota versus Gentile, so a katan's like a Gentile. A katan, he's 12 and a half, we're talking about 12 and 3/4. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's counting Sfira. He wants to fulfill the mitzvah of Sfiras HaOmer. I'm counting, I'm bridging between Pesach and Shavuos. So therefore the Turi Even concludes that a katan can continue counting with the bracha. So we have a machlokas Minchas Chinuch Turi Even, whether a katan can continue counting with a bracha or not. So what's the halacha l'maisa? So Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, all the Ashkenazic poskim conclude that a katan can continue counting with a bracha. It's not a problem because anyway we have other issues besides what we discussed. At the bottom line, they say a katan can continue. Avaji Yosef, Chacham Avaja, concludes that since it's a machlokas in the Achronim in the poskim, he goes with the general klal of Safek brachos kahakel, because in general that is the shittas of the Rambam and the shita of Sfardim. That's why women don't make brachas on mitzvahs asay shazman grama, because in general Sfardim are much more machmir because they work with the Rambam shita that saying a bracha levatala is potentially an issa deraisa. We go with Tosas that it's probably only an issa drabanan, so the Ramah is much more mako in terms of adding a bracha down. But the Sfardim in general, it's the shitason that the Sfardim don't make brachas, only in cases where they're stirring. So Rav Adi Yosef goes with Savak brachas lahakal. So assuming he's the, unless there are other Sfardi poskim will say differently. So Bnei Ashkenaz would continue counting with the bracha, but Bnei Sfar will continue counting. I mean, everyone agrees the katan has a obligation to count Svira. According, if you hold it's 49 separate mitzvahs, which Rov Rishonim hold. and you hold, then whether it's a mitzvah d'Rabban, a mitzvah d'Oraisa, that goes back to our share a couple of weeks ago, but then everyone agrees a katan should continue counting without a bracha, but whether you make a bracha, so the minig Ashkenaz is to make a bracha, the minig Sfard is safek bracha, so hakol not to make a bracha.